This is Neil Schneider for MTBS-TV at Immersed 2017. To my immediate right is Nick Brown. He is stereographer at Stereo D, and he was the supervising stereographer for
Blade Runner 2049.
2049 3D.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Nick.
So my background has been in shooting 3D for the past 10 years. I started in Los Angeles for a company called Reality Digital, shooting native 3D for about 8 years, shooting a lot of concerts, feature films, commercials, live sports broadcasts, did a number of various 3D projects, but all shooting native 3D, capturing with 2 cameras. And in that sense, I was a purist, and I always advocated shooting native 3D. But for the past few years, I've dove into 2D to 3D conversion, started working at Stereo D, and started applying everything that I had learned from shooting native 3D and trying to create a higher quality result in conversion. So it's been my goal for the past few years in conversion to start using advanced techniques and new depth capture techniques to really increase the quality of the stereo.
So for those who are unfamiliar, when we're talking about stereoscopic 3D, in particular native stereoscopic 3D, we mean using a camera with 2 lenses, so one for each eye.
That's right.
And then the left and right eye, and of course when your eyes see this and your brain captures this, you see this wonderful 3D image. But when we're talking about 2D 3D conversion, we're talking about taking like a traditional 2D shot and creating 3D from it. Right. So that sounds really amazing. Yeah. In its simplest form, can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so the basics of 2D to 3D conversion would be taking the original flat 2D plate, then doing a pass of rotoscoping every single object in the frame, even individual parts on a person. You have thousands of pieces of roto, and then we take that roto and we build a depth map based off of layering objects where they need to be in 3D space, and we actually sculpt individual objects, and then the depth map with some secret sauce turns into a left and a right stereo pair, and that's the basic approach.
So when we're talking about rotoscoping, are we talking about like outlining the individual objects in a scene, like like almost, I wouldn't say cut and paste, but literally tracing every shape, every silhouette?
That's right. It's a very tedious process. We have a huge team, and so we've gotten very efficient and fast at doing it, but I still describe it as pushing rocks uphill. It's a very manual process of going from a 2D plate to a 3D plate.
So what did you want to achieve with Blade Runner? Why was this such an important film to have converted into stereoscopic 3D form?
So, when we first saw the 2D cut of the film, I realized that it was something special. It was somewhat of a masterpiece. You have Denis Villeneuve, who is Oscar-nominated director, has done some fantastic films, and doing the cinematography was Roger Deakins, who is arguably the best in the game as a cinematographer. And so my goal was to not butcher it, to not have the stereo be distracting and take away from this masterpiece, and if possible, to add some sort of immersive element to it that adds to it instead of distracts or takes away from it. So it was my goal to create something very authentic and realistic, and nothing that was cartoonish or overplayed or distracting. So it's not a regular 3D film in the sense that you have a ton of stuff flying out in your face and distracting you, but instead it more sucks you in and sort of calms you and allows you to really appreciate the immersive space that they built.
Now, of course, I've seen the movie in its 3D form, and I want to highlight a certain type of stereoscopic 3D or a certain technique that you used in making this movie. Precipitation and fog. I mean, I can't imagine a more difficult element to convert from 2D to 3D, because you have to differentiate, the environment from the other characters. Yep. I mean, how do you get fog in 3D form in front of Ryan Gosling? So I understand there was a specific technique. Can you talk about how it works?
Sure. So that was a major challenge on this film, because the majority of the film was shot with practical effects. So
what are practical effects?
So any smoke, rain, snow, particle type effects that you see in the film, those are all real. They were captured on set, at least 90% of them. There was very little green screen used in the film. So most of all of these particles were captured in camera, and that that was because Roger and Denny wanted this very realistic, visceral world. So they didn't want to overuse CG like a lot of films do these days. And so that provides a challenge for us, meaning that we don't get those elements broken up as separate layers as we might on a higher CG film. Instead, we had to come up with some creative techniques to be able to separate those elements from the picture and things that they were over. So two of the methods that we use are keying and augmented VFX. So keying would be using what's already there in the picture. So if it's rain, for example, we're able to create a matte based off of the rain element and then apply variable stereo to that. Using a keying technique. Sometimes it's based off of color, sometimes it's based off of motion. So if you have a shot that's static and the rain is the only thing moving, we can say, tell me everything that's moving in motion, and extract a matte from that and then be able to comp back over a stereo layer. So we used a combination of motion keys and color keys, brightness keys to create that effect, to get the separation of elements. The other thing that we use pretty extensively is VFX augmentation. And that means that we're taking what's already there and slightly augmenting it by creating another layer in a 3D program like Maya or something like that, and creating fog or rain or something and matching it to what's already there, but just adding our own stereo elements in so we get a really clean result.
So would I be correct? So let's say you had a snowy scene, and what you would do is which you did, and then you would actually find a way, I mean, through the technologies available, get that snow off the scene entirely, like clean it up, and then put your own snow in its place with the 3D benefits.
That's right.
So you're kind of cheated.
A little bit, slightly, but the goal is always to stay very true to the original source, and so constantly we're A/Bing to the original plate and making sure we're not deviating from that we're keeping the filmmaker's intent, and that we're not modifying it too much. So the goal is for it to not be distracting, right, and to just bring you into it further. So that's always our number one goal is to work with the filmmakers and to really achieve the creative intent that they're looking for.
Okay, good stuff. Now, if you were able to go to town with the original Blade Runner, do you think it would be just as good?
I think so. I think we could come very close to what we've done on this film, but there's something that sets this newer film apart in terms of stereo technique that we used. For all the close-ups and medium shots of the characters, we implemented using the actual 3D models of the characters, and we are able to get those 3D models from the photo scans that they do for most films these days. Anything that's high CG, they tend to give photo scans of the characters, which is taking a ton of photographs around the character, and then through software processing, creating a 3D model, a very high resolution 3D model from that. So we get those assets and then create a depth map from this actual 3D model of a character's face. So instead of manually building a face out and building a nose and building cheek shapes and potentially distorting someone's face, we're using the real model of that character's face mapped to them as they're rotating, and the results are incredible. The stereo fidelity, the stereo resolution that you get from using a head scan of a character as opposed to building it manually is night and day. And to me, that was a big thing coming from native 3D shooting with two cameras. I really think it's important to get characters' faces right. A lot of close-ups, that's all you're looking at is the face, and you analyze the different details of the face and the structure, and everyone's face is a little bit different. And so the fact that we were able to incorporate using the real 3D models of characters is something that no other conversion has done to this extent. And since the original film was shot 30 years ago, we don't have character scans of all of them. We do have Harrison Ford's character scan, but he looks a bit different now than he did.
But don't say that to his face, because I hear he could still throw a punch.
Absolutely.
To Ryan Gosling, no less.
Yeah, he apparently threw one real punch. Yeah, on accident. So, well, maybe it wasn't on accident.
But I read Ryan was honored to receive that punch.
Of course he was. Who wouldn't be, right? I'll take a punch from Harrison. Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. So excellent. Now, how just so people have an understanding. I mean, when I originally thought of 2D, 3D conversion, I thought of something that, the Hollywood studios just did really quickly. Just, they had their movie, they put some conversion in there, throw it out, and voila, you got a 3D film. Yeah. But I know that a lot of work went into this. Yeah. Can you give an indication to say how long the movie took to make and how long the conversion itself took to make, so people have an idea of just how much energy was put into this?
Sure, yeah. So I can't speak as much to how long the film itself took to make. I don't really know when they started pre-production and that sort of thing, but I can speak to the stereo side, and we spent about 8 to 9 months on the 3D conversion, which is plenty of time. We do many films quicker than that because of release dates. Oftentimes we just don't have that much time, and we have to figure out how to do it quicker, and we throw a lot of resources at it, and we're able to achieve it. But ideally, the longer you have, the more refined of a product you can create. And so we definitely had plenty of time on this film, and all shots went through many iterations to get to the final result. It was a very a good pace for a 3D conversion, I would say. We definitely had the time to do it right, which was nice. So
now I know Stereo D, their whole business is very much 2D, 3D conversion. Do you think that Blade Runner 2049 was more suited to a conversion, or let's just say 3D period, sure, more suited to 3D than other films that you've worked on?
Absolutely. So,
and why do you say that?
Yeah. So, a lot of 3D projects I've worked on in the past are not good films for 3D. They decide to shoot or convert to 3D just for the extra money or something, but the filmmaking style doesn't lend itself to stereo. A lot of films these days are very fast cut, extremely long lenses, and that type of thing. Whereas this new film, Blade Runner 2049, was shot perfect for stereo in terms of very long takes that build moments, and wider framing than general, I would say. A lot of close-ups that fully include the character in the frame as opposed to cutting them off and breaking the illusion. So yeah, there was a lot of just slow takes and wide camera angles that lent itself to stereo. It gives you time to look around and actually appreciate the stereo space, as opposed to something that's cut very fast, where you really don't get the time to take it in. Essentially, you need a few seconds to actually appreciate the stereo, for your brain to comprehend that extra layer of space, the Z space. And so I think that this film specifically was shot perfectly. And that was one of the first things I told Roger in one of our early reviews. I said, this film is shot beautifully for 3D. This is one of the best films shot for 3D. And so yeah, it's great.
Now, one more question for you. What I noticed was in the way the film was shot is that it had a range of depth. It wasn't always consistent, sure, 3D from one scene to the next. And I understand this was done by design. Yeah. Why? What were you working to achieve?
So it's always my goal when adding stereo to complement the story and to use what's already there and use the stereo to help further what we're trying to achieve emotionally or creatively in the story. So part of that is my design of saying this is how I think the stereo should be, and a large part of that in working with these high-profile filmmakers, with Roger and Denis, was getting their creative direction and doing many reviews with them, and they would give overall 3D direction. They would rarely critique just one shot or something in a shot. They would say, everything in this environment, I want to feel more compressed. I want the character to feel trapped in this space. And so for those types of scenes, interiors specifically, we used a much more compressed, conservative depth palette to achieve that. Whereas when we went to outside exteriors, they really enjoyed opening the space up. They wanted the character to feel small and the world to feel large. And so for those, we used a more open depth palette. But you can see a chart of the flow of the stereo across this film, and it actually correlates pretty well with what's happening emotionally and character-wise in the story. So it's my goal always to add to that and use it as an actual creative tool instead of just an overall effect at the end of the film or something. So if you look at the graph of the depth for the film, it's not just a straight linear thing. You see arcs and emotional curves and things like that correlate with the story. So I think it's a very important part of stereo is to actually use it creatively. You know, I always compare it to the musical score in that it's not always at maximum volume, right? You have to have these peaks and valleys to really accentuate certain things, and so we definitely used that on this film. And like I said, it was a lot of it was guided actually by Roger and Denis and their reactions to the first passes of stereo that we would show them. They would say, no, we want this space to feel more like this or whatever. So it was really great getting to actually work with these genius filmmakers and learn from them and take that creative direction.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks so much for joining us.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
This is Neil Schneider for MTBS-TV at Immersed 2017. Thank you for joining us.